Teofimo Lopez, and we all know who he is. However, he went live last night, and he went on a rant, to say the least, in regards to what happened with Canelo Alvarez. Remember, there was news that broke about 2 or 3 months ago, right before this training camp started, saying that Teofimo Lopez was going to be joining the Canelo Alvarez fight camp team, and they were going to be joining forces now going forward. However, that appears to now be out the window. You can make your guess as to why. I think it's a pretty good idea as to why that was the case, but Teofimo Lopez is now out of the Canelo Alvarez camp, which is big news. The only thing that's a little bit shocking now is that he made another point there. And I know he's made hints at it over the past, give or take, past few weeks, but Teofimo Lopez said two things. First and foremost, now he wants Terrence Bud Crawford to go and defeat Canelo Alvarez so that he can go step in the ring with Bud Crawford. There's a lot to unpack right there. First and foremost, I'm not shocked that Canelo Alvarez kicked Teofimo Lopez out of his camp. There's only one reason that makes sense as to why that would be the case. Not because of talent. We all know Lopez is one of the most talented fighters in all boxing. I made points to this last week when I went on Teofimo Lopez discussing his unnecessary racial tactics and how he's trying to make his name a villain role by being a racial slur type of guy. And I said this, him being boycotted and taken out of boxing is not going to happen. That's not how the sport works. But what will happen is there's going to be ramifications that occur because of what he continues to do outside of the ring. And I believe that this is probably one of those things that's going to happen now. Canelo Alvarez is a man that protects his image. He's a man that is a stand-up guy overall. And the fact that Teofimo Lopez is out there running racial slurs time and time again, making racial moves, is not going to be something that Canelo Alvarez is going to be any part of wanting to be associated with. Eddie Reynoso, none of those guys. Therefore, things like what just occurred by Teofimo Lopez getting kicked out of his camp is not surprising whatsoever. That being said, the second part to that is who Teofimo Lopez decided to go and call out. Terrence Bud Crawford. Is this the most shocking thing in the world based upon the fact that Teo and him and Bud Crawford have been going back and forth over the past few months? No, it's not shocking. It just is shocking by the fact that Teofimo Lopez would even consider the idea of wanting to fight Bud Crawford. Now, his reasoning, albeit very wild, was that if Bud Crawford can beat Canelo, then so could Teofimo Lopez. Listen, there are two parts to that. Neither one of those are true. First and foremost, Teofimo Lopez would stand zero chance against Canelo Alvarez, and at the very same time, he would stand absolutely no way in heck a single chance against the likes of Bud Crawford. Teofimo Lopez even having the audacity to want to fight Bud Crawford is, you could say, inspiring to some extent. But let me make this very clear. If Teofimo Lopez and Bud Crawford ever step foot in a ring together and shared the ring for potentially 12 rounds, that fight's not going more than 3 or 4 rounds. Bud Crawford would annihilate Teofimo Lopez. It is a fight where we remember what happened to Errol Spence. This would be Errol Spence on steroids. There is levels to this thing as well as weight classes. Bud Crawford is superior to Teofimo Lopez in both those categories, and it would not be a pretty fight for Teofimo Lopez. Now, like I said, sure, can I give him some props to a certain extent saying, hey, you got balls for him to go out there and try to challenge him? Sure. At the same time, it's the most unwise thing in the world. Yet, that is what Teofimo Lopez wants. And I'll go back to saying this one more time. I don't think he's going to be boycotted. None of those things should ever happen to Teofimo Lopez. I think it is what it is. You can say freedom of speech. Whatever it is, Teofimo Lopez will be able to say what he wants to say. But there's going to be ramifications from those around him. The way people view Teofimo Lopez, the way that people decide to respect or their lack of respect of Teofimo Lopez are all things that's going to hinder you when you decide to go on the path that he's going with the racial slurs. And I do believe that's why Canelo Alvarez kicked him out of his camp. And it's not shocking to me at all. If that's the way and the type of way you're going to handle your business, you're going to have ramifications hit yourself. And I think this is one of them. At the very same time, in the midst of a press conference that just got wrapped up for prepping up for the July 12th card, Hamza Shiraz versus Edgar Berlanga, Shakur Stevenson, Williams Zepeda, that card. They just had the press conference, the very first one for that. It's going to be happening in New York City. And in the midst of that, Turki Al-Sheikh gave a phone call. And he announced something, which is, once again, something that Teofimo Lopez has been calling for. And I guess in this way, he got rewarded with it. Because Turki Al-Sheikh says this. He's in talks with Eddie Hearn's Matchroom Boxing to stage a Jaron Ennis versus Teofimo Lopez fight next for the unified welterweight title. I made a point after the Times Square card, which, once again, I'm always going to be a guy that gives guys respect for what they do. Lopez was one of the only guys that night that showed up and handled business. Teofimo Lopez did his thing in the ring. He looked great. At the very same time, I said, listen, 140 is a weight class that I would like to see Lopez kind of stick around in. I think that weight class would make plenty of sense for him to stay at. And I think he could go clean house, become undisputed, so on and so forth. Yet his claim, what he wants, is that he wants to move to 147. The very same thing that Ron Garcia and Devin Haney are doing as well. And he wants to go right for Boots Ennis. I'll be honest. Is there a path in a way that Teofimo Lopez could defeat Jaron Boots Ennis? Of course, it's boxing. I don't think he's going to get a KO. He'd have to beat on points. Is that possible? Yes. Is that who I'm going to be putting money on potentially? Absolutely not. Now, obviously, you could say Jaron Boots Ennis hasn't been always consistent in his performances. Neither has Teofimo Lopez. But what I do recognize in both guys is that when the lights are bright, when the stage is set, that Boots Ennis and Teofimo Lopez are two guys that do rise to the occasion, typically go up against the guys that are fighting at a high level. That's the way both guys tend to roll. Therefore, both guys will probably be at the peak self. And if that is the case, Boots Ennis will defeat Teofimo Lopez. Now, it's a little bit different because I believe that if we were talking about the Bud Crawford fight a few moments ago, then in that situation, Bud Crawford's a more skilled, more powerful, and a better overall fighter, as well as the massive weight advantage. In this fight, I would say that skill-wise, Teofimo Lopez is better than Jaron Boots Ennis. But the all-around aspects of boxing, I would take Jaron Boots Ennis, plus Boots Ennis still does have the weight advantage in that fight. So therefore, I will favor Jaron Boots Ennis. Now, as I said, though, I am a little bit surprised that this fight is going to get made. Because at the end of the day, this is the only sport in boxing where I said, listen, guys are not going to get boycotted for what they say. But the fact that he did talk himself into potentially a Jaron Boots Ennis fight is a little bit shocking. Especially considering the fact that when you look at 147, Boots Ennis has talked about wanting to become undisputed. That's not on the route to becoming undisputed. That's on the route for having a big fight at 147, which is interesting. We also were rooming Ryan Garcia, which is now obviously off the table. You could have Conor Benn, Devin Haney, those guys. All of them apparently going to be off the table. Teofimo Lopez jumps the gun, and now we'll probably get Jaron Boots Ennis in August in Riyadh season, Saudi Arabia. That would be a cool, interesting fight to have happen. And it would be interesting, like I said, if Teofimo Lopez beats Jaron Boots Ennis, he's obviously going to be a top 10 pound per pound on everybody's list. And honestly, the winner of that fight would be solidified in the top 10 pound per pound list. It'll be interesting to see what happens there, though.